Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Hello and welcome to the London part of the show. I'm Alex Forsyth. Coming up later in the programme, the Liberal Democrat leader Vince Cable tells us why he is confident the party can make gains in May's local elections. Well, I'm joined for the duration by Siobhan McDonough, the Labour MP for Mitcham and Morden, by Bob Blackman, the Conservative MP for Harrow East, and Baroness Kramer, the Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesperson and the former MP for Richmond Park. I want to start with housing. The Prime Minister has often spoken about the housing market. Last year she admitted it was broken. This week, she donned a high-vis jacket and visited a construction site in London. She was there to deliver a keynote speech about how to get housing built, and she challenged developers to get their priorities right.
The bonuses paid to the heads of some of our biggest developers are based not on the number of homes they build, but on their profits or share price. I expect developers to do their duty for Britain and build the homes our country needs.
But in London, where the housing crisis is most acute, council leaders rejected the idea that local authorities and developers were to blame. The Labour Mayor of Lewisham, Sir Steve Bullock, who is also the housing spokesperson for London councils, said the Prime Minister had shied away from the one policy that could increase house building.
I found it really hard to understand why the Prime Minister thinks that a local council can force a private developer to build out a planning permission which they have been given. The single thing that would make a difference, not just in London but across the nation, would be to raise the cap on what we can spend on new housing. The housing revenue account, let us borrow against the assets that we've got. This is stopped being a matter of controversy within local government. People from all political persuasions are now agreed that just give us the ability to build and we will get on and do it.
So Steve Bullock's views. And let me come to you first, if I can, Bob, on this. I mean, why doesn't the government do that? Just give councils the power to borrow and build?
Well, the reality is the government has allocated to the Mayor of London and London councils a record sum of money, £3.15 billion for the development of housing. And yet in London, it's the one area in the country where the house building is going down instead of going up. So we've got a Mayor of London who made all sorts of promises. He's failing to deliver on those promises. And actually now we need some action to go with the money that the government has provided.
But you hear the council saying that it's actually they need more powers to do this.
Well, it's interesting that the Mayor of Lewisham is on. He's said that he is cancelling the compulsory purchase order around Millwall Football Club, where the original idea was to develop housing. Yet his deputy mayor says, no, the compulsory purchase order is going forward. So there seems to be confusion about
case, but obviously there is a capital-wide problem here.
Well, one of the problems is that we've got the same thing in Enfield, where a scheme for 10,000 homes has been cancelled effectively because of the interference of the mayor. We've got Haringey, where this public-private partnership seems to be going awry because of divisions in the Labour Party. You've got Earl's Court, which is under challenge. You've got Old Oak Common, where huge numbers of homes can be built. And indeed, I piloted a bill through Parliament for Boris Johnson when he was mayor to allow Transport for London to develop homes.
Siobhan, I can see you shaking your head, choosing at the bit to defend Labour's record.
What Bob knows is most of these schemes are about building private houses at high costs in London, where the average house is 15 times the average salary. We are never, ever going to get to the 300,000 properties the government wants unless councils and housing associations are allowed to build. The last time we built that number was 1969, when councils and housing associations were building. We've got the land, we've got the policy, we've got the paper, we've got the high-vis jackets. The one thing we're not doing is actually getting our act together and getting out there and building.
Of course, what Theresa May has said here is that there is a duty on developers. I mean, she's putting the onus on the private companies to get their act together on this and get building. Is that not something that Labour would welcome?
It's a part of it, but it's not the total. I mean, it's the most expensive way in the world to build your social housing for families who can't afford to buy by Section 106, by planning agreements. The cheapest and the best way to do it is to go out there and use the land it's there. 40% of all empty sites are owned by the public sector. I think government should force the public sector to use them in the first place for housing.
Susan Kramer, I can hear you next to me.
I mean, developers make their money by keeping supply short. And can I say of Theresa May, I mean, the word naive is perhaps a gentle comment on telling developers to ignore their profit interests, to go ahead and build. I mean, the power does need to be put into the hands of local councils. I think we could have used a GLA fund, frankly, to drive building in London, but at local council level, people need to have that opportunity. But the onus and pressure has to be then to deliver affordable and social housing. You know, where I live, sort of in Barnes, in Richmond, I am watching 3 new blocks going up, and every single one of them is wall-to-wall luxury housing. And when you see the lights on at night, everybody knows this story. Less than a third of the lights, they're just investment properties.
I mean, let me just bring Bob here answering that point. The Prime Minister has made housing a real priority for her. She's pledged to build this new generation of council social housing, to do something about this, to make home ownership the dream for future generations. But you hear the criticism.
I understand the criticism, and Siobhan's right about one thing, and that is that the land is 40% owned by the public sector already. Yeah. Now, the big problem about house building in this country is the cost of land, particularly in London, where that contributes towards the high cost. Now, what we can do, quite clearly, is through the relevant agencies now, to actually force that public land to be used for housing. The planning permission is not an issue because that's being granted by local authorities. What is an issue is getting the housing built. And we have too few housing developers in this country now, because 10 years ago we had, 2,500 companies that built houses. Now we're down to about 10 that realistically contribute. So we've actually got to broaden the scope. But it's all about making the contracts and getting them in place. And in my view, in the public sector, what we should do is actually say, ignore the cost of the land, we'll take that out of the equation, we build the homes and then we charge rents on the cost of building the homes and ignore the cost of the land. Just
briefly, Siobhan, often in this housing debate we hear attacks on record of various governments. Isn't the truth that we've got a broken market and it's the people who live in London that can't afford their homes that are suffering
I can trade numbers with the best of them, but that doesn't get a roof over any homeless family's head. The point is we've got to get out there and do it, and Bob is right about the public sector sites. But in order to get councils and the health service and the prison service to do that, you have to make it their priority and say that if they don't do it, there will be financial consequences, because without that, it's never going to happen. We can have as many glossy reports as you like, but there is a role here for government to force public bodies to use their land in the first place for housing.
And we have done it before.
And the reality is that housing associations are sitting on huge amounts of money in assets and money they could use, but they don't because they're quite comfortable.
No, we have to leave that there. Sadly, we can't solve the housing crisis, although we've made some inroads, I'm sure. Now, it's been a big week for the Liberal Democrats. They marked the 30th anniversary of the formation of the party, and their members are attending their annual spring conference this weekend. At the forefront of their concerns will be the upcoming local elections in May, which their leader has said will be crucial to rebuilding Lib Dem influence at every level of government. So how will they fare in London? Bhavani Vadi reports.
The Lib Dems are the only party that's consistently argued for staying in the EU and have put this at the heart of their local election campaign. This week, they released messages in 21 different European languages targeting EU nationals.
This is the first test of opinion since the general election, and Brexit and the impact on Brexit, the negative hit on London, will be a big theme. We've had a massive increase in our membership, much of it in the capital, mostly young people. We've now got a significantly bigger party nationally than the Conservatives, for example, and a lot of energy, much of it, again, centred around the Brexit issue.
A key target for the party is the Royal Borough of Kingston. The Conservatives ended 12 years of Lib Dem control there at the last local elections in 2014. This time is expected to be close, with an unusually high number of marginal wards in the borough.
It was a completely different ball game back in 2014. Essentially, a lot of people were punishing us nationally in local elections. But this time round, I think people really are looking at what the local issues are. More homes, not the luxury tower blocks, better air quality.
The borough also voted to remain in the EU.
I mean, I'm a politician and I'm bored with Brexit, and I think actually when you talk to people on the doorsteps, it's very much the same view. Most people are satisfied with the job that we're doing here. We've invested heavily in things in the infrastructure, so we've spent more money than we were going to on roads and pavements and playgrounds.
Kingston is also home to the Coronation Stone, where 7 Saxon kings were said to have been crowned, the last being Ethelred the Unready. In Old English, unready actually means badly advised. So are the Lib Dems also ill-advised to be sticking to their anti-Brexit message when it's failed to bring them electoral glory?
It's now becoming much more clear what's at stake. We had the referendum. I think a lot of people took the view, let the government get on with it, see what happens. But we can now see that we are going to leave, if the government gets its way, leave the single market. Massive implications for London and all its service-based industries.
The party celebrated its 30th birthday this week. It's been a journey which saw them rise to government and then punished in the polls for their part in that coalition. Their record in southwest London reflects the rollercoaster of their electoral fortunes. Their 3 London MPs hold seats in these boroughs. The party runs Sutton Council and are the main opposition group in Kingston and Richmond, both councils they once controlled and have high hopes of winning back.
The Lib Dems need local election success to build towards whenever the next general election is coming. So if they don't do really quite well in London, and indeed outside London this time, then it will be seen as evidence that they're simply treading water, not making progress. The Labour Party, which has this bigger capacity to, as it were, send a massive message to the government and to Mrs May be an easier shift of votes for die-hard Remainers than the Lib Dems.
So, in this overwhelmingly Remain city, the Lib Dems have so far failed to capitalise on their continued anti-Brexit stance. Will they be able to do so at the polls in May?
Pavani Vadi reporting there. And Susan Kramer, the Lib Dems failed to capitalise on the anti-Brexit vote at the general election. So why do you think it might be different at these local elections?
Well, I would point out that in the areas you've highlighted, Vince Cable won Twickenham, which we had lost before, and Ed Davey won Kingston, which we had lost before. So we did see a return, and it was...
But not nationally. I mean, in London, yes, but not nationally.
And I'm talking about the specific areas that you're actually focused on. So I think we find when we're out on the doorstep, I mean, in many of these cases, we were a local force for many years, so people know us there. So, for example, when we're in Kingston and we just talk with people and identify that 3 new schools are needed, including a special school, and that we desperately cannot let a Conservative local authority take money out of a special needs budget to fund other parts of local activity, we get a very strong response. We talk about the housing need, but that we need affordable housing. The various projects that have been built in on the Richmond side, for example, in Richmond and Twickenham, both have this incredibly high luxury content. I mean, never mind having almost no affordable, certainly no social housing. So there are really big local issues
but do you think
fighting
that
on and where we have track record.
I mean, do you say you're fighting on that at a local level, but the message from the top of the party is very much we are an anti-Brexit party. And in London, which was a Remain city, aren't you just kicking it an open door?
Well, I mean, we are an anti-Brexit party. We don't for one second deny that we're an anti-Brexit party. We think that that is the best outcome. And we are interested, because many people want to engage, because as you know, so when we had the referendum, there's so much that none of us knew. And now this extraordinary complexity, I mean, and the level of damage is beginning to become apparent. People are feeling it in their pocket.
But isn't the danger...
wages and
isn't the danger
prices
for the Lib Dems that if you do campaign on an anti-Brexit message, at a local level, councillors won't be be able to affect change? Because, of course, it's the MPs in Parliament who
I
may or may not be able to change the Brexit.
People are sending a message, aren't they?
Yes.
They're using their vote locally for their councillors, their council, but they're also getting the opportunity to send a message to the government.
What was, Labour's message is quite confused on Brexit. So if people vote for Labour, what are they saying?
Well, ours is clear. So.
If people are going to vote Labour in London, as they did in enormous numbers just last year at the general election, they are making a point about being anti-Brexit. They are also making a point about housing, because this is not just about people on low incomes anymore. If you knock on the door of a private tenant, they are almost virtually always Labour. There is a toxic mix outside there.
So, Bob, are you going to take the flak for all of this in these elections?
No, I don't think so. I think what we're going to be talking about, certainly the Conservative Party is going to be talking about how you run local councils more effectively for the benefit of local people. The reality is, of course, that Conservative councils in London have always done a really good job of delivering high-quality services at a lower cost.
The problem is, with polls...
Zach Goldsmith took back, by the way, Richmond from the Liberal Democrats at the general election.
Yes, we won it at the by-election. He won by 45.
So let me put this to you, Bob,
win by many in the by-election.
The polls, with all the caveats around polls, of course, say that you're going to take a right hammering in these elections.
Well, I actually think that it'll be interesting. I mean, we're talking about the Liberal Democrat performance, of course, and the key there is I think we will take seats off the Liberal Democrats in Sutton, for example, where they've ruled...
seats off Labour, Bob?
Well, I'm looking forward to taking seats off Labour in Harrow, by the way.
Yeah.
Where
I think he's been a little bit over-optimistic.
Where their performance has been dreadful. They are one of the worst performing councils in London and in the country, with the third highest level of council tax. So I think, there'll be mixtures. I think the key point about London elections is always not necessarily to think about performance of parties, but looking at individual councils, how they've performed as a council when whoever's in control, and then look at what the opposition is.
But if you do take these polls, there are some really significant councils that you could lose. I mean, are the Tories really struggling in London? Are they set to struggle for some time? Have they just given up on the capital?
Far from it. No, far from it. We haven't given up on the capital at all. I think one of the things that we have to do, and I've been counselling this, is to say, yes, people have got to go out on the doorsteps and sell the benefit of having a Conservative-run council, as opposed to having a high-spending...
Can I just say, at the moment,
these national issues run through to locally. I mean, our local councils are definitely suffering from the cuts that they're facing. So that, school funding, there isn't a school that hasn't had to go to its parents and basically say, could you fund this? Can you help us with that? Or I'm so sorry that then we're going to be without a teacher. But what I'm saying is people are feeling this bite locally because of what's happening nationally, and the idea that they can't send a message is a false one. People will vote on the things that matter to them, and it will be a mix of national issues. It'll be a mix of Brexit. In Richmond, it's going to be Heathrow. I think they're fed up with local Conservatives being opposed to Heathrow Airport, but very happily living with the party centrally being in favour of that third runway, for goodness sake.
There's very few Conservative MPs in London that support...
Bob, let me just put this to you. So Susan says it's a mix of the local and the national one in these elections. But isn't it the case that the government has overlooked London because they've been so focused on regional devolution elsewhere? We hear a lot about the Northern Powerhouse and train links elsewhere in the country.
But of course, we got devolution
first. Is that at the expense of
London? One of the things we should remember is, in terms of local government, we got devolution first with the Mayor of London.
Under a Labour government, I think you'll find.
Yeah, well, finally. But the reality is that...
In the same year we got elected. Actually, it was the first bill introduced under the Labour government in '97. I know because I was on the committee stage of that bill.
And personally, I supported the principle of having the Mayor of London, and I think it's the right thing to have for London. What we've got to do as a party is continue that process of devolution and devolution of power. We've got the 100% retention of business rates for London. Okay. We've got massive amounts of money being...
We're going to have to leave it there, but we will see what May and these local election results will bring. No doubt we'll be watching them very closely. Sadly, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Let's see what May brings. Now, on Tuesday, the Chancellor will give us his spring statement. He's ditched the big event that was the spring budget. Instead, this will be a rundown of the state of the nation's finances. So what could be in it for London, and what would our guests like to see? Now, Susan, you are the LibDems Treasury spokeswoman, so were you to be there at the dispatch box, what would you give for London?
Well, I believe that we should never look at it as London or out the regions. Everybody is in need, for example, of massive infrastructure spending. And frankly, this government has always insisted on counting infrastructure spending as if it was part of a deficit. It never should. We should be out there borrowing because, you know, new rail systems, whether it's if you need new ports, new transport networks, all of that should be funded despite what's happening on day-to-day spending. So I would be doing major investment absolutely across the country, both London and in the north and in the Midlands.
I mean, Labour's manifesto did promote the idea of borrowing to invest, but it got quite a kicking from the Conservatives for that.
My personal wish for the spring statement is that we could just have the £1.1 billion given back that the Department of Local Government and Housing gave back to the Treasury. If they just gave us that money back, we could build over 20,000 prefabs on the public land we've just been speaking about. We'd have 20,000 houses by the summer if we could actually do that.
Do you think that's going to happen, Bob?
Well, I think one of the problems is that money that was given and allocated to London for the Mayor of London to use has been returned.
But this is much more, Bob.
No, this is
the government's actually
3.15 billion was allocated over a 3-year period.
Has returned money for
I'm saying it's returned money because the Mayor of London hasn't spent it.
I mean, you're obviously out campaigning for the elections we were just talking about. What are people telling you on the doorstep that they want to hear from government about local spending?
Well, local spending is actually allocating the money properly and most effectively. I mean, one of the problems I think in most parts of London is you'll see, unfortunately, rough sleepers on the increase and actually providing decent housing for people at a price they can afford. I agree, absolutely is right. I mean, the difference is possibly I've taken some action, and on the 3rd of April, that my Homelessness Reduction Act becomes reality and local authorities will have responsibility.
But
now,
it's
with that
an
responsibility
NHS and social care issue as well, and that ties into the homelessness agenda. And London hospitals that are desperately, you know, have struggled through this whole winter period, that face very serious funding crises. And this is something that actually could be tackled, both the social care and the funding side. The country is ready for a dedicated tax to support the NHS and to support social care. We've asked the government, you know, will you put in place at least a beginning on that with a penny in the pound on additional income tax, just literally for the NHS and social care, and that would take off the immediate pressure. If the government did just that one thing in the spring statement, it would genuinely change people's lives.
About the future funding of adult social care.
Just a final thought now. We're almost out of time, but just a final brief thought, Siobhan, if I can. You know, when the Chancellor stands up, what can we hear from Jeremy Corbyn in response? Will he just attack or will he have ideas of his own? Briefly.
I'm sure Jeremy's got plenty of ideas, and I'd be giving him my idea that we could just have that £1.1 billion back and built 20,000 homes for people who need them.
And do you think that we're going to get that kind of talk from the Chancellor?
Well, I hope we're going to get some improvements to infrastructure. I want to see Crossrail 2 funded. I want to see other improvements for London that are specific for London. And we raise the money from the income tax and other taxes that we send to other parts of the country. I want to see that money raised in London, used in London for the benefit of Londoners.
So you want to see some more money handed down?
I want to see the money that we raise in taxes being used in London on big infrastructure projects.
We have to leave it there. Thank you very much to all of my guests, Susan Kraber, Siobhan McDonough and Bob Blackman. With that, it's back to Sarah.